6 weeks in the cardiac unit at Mercy General, and my daughter never once walked through those doors. Not once. I was discharged on a Tuesday morning in mid-November with $67 in my wallet, a prescription I couldn't afford, and a text message that said, "Don't worry about the ride, Dad. Just grab an Uber." I stood outside the hospital entrance in the same flannel shirt I'd worn when the ambulance brought me in, watching other people's families pull up in warm cars. And I thought about all the years I'd worked that hardware store, 12-hour days, 6 days a week, to make sure she never had to stand anywhere alone. I was 64 years old, and I had never felt so small. Her name is my daughter, and she's 31, and she sells real estate in Scottsdale, which she will tell you about within 30 seconds of meeting you. Her husband, my son-in-law, flips commercial properties. They have a house with a pool and a Peloton and a refrigerator that tells you when you're out of milk. I know all of this because she posts about it. I sat on the concrete bench outside the discharge entrance and counted what was in my wallet. $67, $150, $110, and 7 ones. The woman at the discharge desk had mentioned the cab to my neighborhood usually ran about 45, depending on traffic. My house was 23 miles east, out past the city limits, where the lots were big and the streets were quiet, and the neighbors still waved when you drove past. I called her 4 times. Each time it rang through to voicemail. The 5th time, she picked up. "Dad, I'm showing a property right now." "I know, sweetheart. I need a ride. They discharged me this morning and I don't." "Can't you just take an Uber?" "I don't have enough cash, and my card is." "I'll Venmo you $40. Give me 10 minutes." She didn't send $40. She sent 25 with a note that said for the ride, "Love you." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I opened the Uber app and looked at the estimated fare, $48. I closed the app. I put the phone in my pocket, and I sat there on that bench for 2.5 hours, watching the November sky go from grey to darker grey, watching people come and go, watching a man about my age get helped into a minivan by his son and his son's wife and 2 grandkids who were fighting over who got to carry Grandpa's bag. I watched until I couldn't watch any more. That's when I heard someone say my name. "Mr. Pierce, Hank Pierce." I turned. A woman was standing about 10 feet away, maybe late 40s, in a navy coat with a canvas tote over one shoulder. She had reading glasses pushed up on her head and a look on her face like she wasn't completely sure she had the right person. "That's me," I said. She walked over slowly. "I thought so. It's been a long time. I'm Joanna. Joanna Aldridge." "I don't know if you remember me. I used to work at Pierce Hardware. Back in the 90s. I looked at her, and then it clicked. A teenager, 16 or 17, who'd come in asking about a summer job the same week I'd put up a help-wanted sign in the window. Skinny kid, serious eyes, showed up every day 10 minutes early. "Joanna," I said, "you stock shelves." She smiled wide. "I stocked shelves. I swept floors. I learned how to cut pipe. You taught me how to cut pipe." She paused, tilting her head. "Are you okay? You've been sitting out here a while." I opened my mouth to say I was fine. The words didn't come. "My ride fell through," I said instead. She sat down on the bench next to me without hesitating, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Where are you headed?" "Out past Camelback Road, east of the city." "I know that area. My firm does work up there." She studied me for a second. "Let me drive you." "Joanna, you don't have to." "Mr. Pierce," her voice was quiet but firm, "you hired me when I was 16 and my stepdad had just kicked me out of the house. You paid me in cash when I needed it. You let me use the store phone to call my grandmother, collect 3 times a week because I didn't have a cell phone." She paused. "You never made me feel like a charity case. Not once. Please let me drive you home." I didn't argue. Her car was a sensible grey SUV, clean and warm. She had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and she offered me some without making a production of it. We drove east out of the hospital district, and I watched Phoenix unspool outside the window. The big, wide streets and the palm trees and the mountains in the distance going rust-colored in the afternoon light. What happened? She asked after a few miles, if you don't mind my asking. Heart. They kept me 6 weeks in the cardiac unit. I'm supposed to take it easy. She nodded. And your daughter couldn't? She's busy, I said. Then after a moment, she's always busy. Joanna didn't push. We drove in silence for a while, and it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that happens between people who already understand the shape of a situation without needing it explained. What do you do now? I asked. You said your firm? Commercial real estate law, she said. I've been practicing for about 12 years, mostly contract disputes, property rights, some estate work. She glanced over. I ended up going to Arizona State on a partial scholarship, then law school at U of A took me a while, but I got there. I felt something warm move through my chest. That's wonderful, Joanna. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I was working at the store that summer, I had about $30 to my name. I was sleeping at my grandmother's, but she had a small place, and I felt like a burden. I was thinking about dropping out of my senior year. She paused, and then one Friday you handed me my envelope and there was an extra $200 in it. You said it was a bonus for taking inventory. There was no inventory. I knew that. I didn't say anything. I remembered. I hadn't thought about it in years, but I remembered. You were a good worker, I said. You say my senior year, she said simply. I graduated. I got the scholarship. I went to college. That's the chain. I've always known it. She signaled and turned onto my street. Now, where exactly? She stopped. I had already seen it. My house sat at the end of a gravel driveway behind 2 old Palo Verde trees. I'd lived there for 31 years. I'd built the deck myself. I'd planted the garden along the front walk with my wife, Caroline, the year after we moved in, when my daughter was just 3 years old and used to sit in the dirt and pat the soil with her hands and call herself a farmer. The yard was completely overgrown. The mailbox at the curb was so stuffed that envelopes had fallen out and scattered in the gravel. Every window in the house was dark, and when Joanna pulled into the driveway, I could see the side gate that led to my workshop was secured, with a padlock I had never put there. A brand new padlock, shiny brass, still had the tag on it. Mr. Pierce, Joanna said carefully, how long did you say you were in the hospital? 6 weeks. She didn't say anything else. She got out of the car and came around to my side and waited while I climbed out, and we stood there together in the driveway, looking at my house, like it was something we needed to prepare ourselves for. The front door was unlocked. That was the first strange thing. I never left my door unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, the particular smell of a place that's been sealed up too long. The power was off. Joanna turned on the flashlight on her phone, and we moved through the living room, past the furniture I'd bought with Caroline, past the bookshelf full of her novels that I still hadn't been able to move. The kitchen was worse. The refrigerator had stopped running weeks ago. I opened it and quickly shut it again. On the counter, there was a stack of mail 2 inches thick. I flipped through the top few envelopes, bills, a shut-off notice from the electric company, a notice from the county assessor's office. I set it down. Joanna was standing in the doorway to the hall, looking at the padlocked gate through the kitchen window. Did you put that lock on yourself? She asked. No. Is anyone else supposed to have access to your property? No. She came over and picked up the county assessor's envelope. She held it up. Can I? I nodded. She opened it carefully. Read it once, then again. Mr. Pierce, she said, her voice measured and controlled in the way that told me she was choosing her words. This is a notice confirming a property appraisal request filed on your behalf. It says the full appraisal report was sent to a she checked the letter, an authorized representative. Your property is valued at approximately $720,000. I felt the floor toot. I didn't request an appraisal, I said. I know, Joanna said. She set the letter down on the counter and looked at me steadily. I think we need to go through all of this mail, and I think I need to see any legal documents you have in this house. Can you show me where you keep those? I kept most of my important paperwork in a fireproof box in the bedroom closet. We found it undisturbed. Inside were my insurance documents, the deed to the house, Caroline's death certificate, an old will I'd written 15 years ago, and a copy of my medical proxy paperwork. We spread everything on the kitchen table by the light of Joanna's phone. "Joanna," I said, "about 20 minutes in, there's something I need to tell you." She looked up. 3 days after my heart attack, my daughter came to the hospital. I closed my eyes, pulling the memory up. I was in the ICU. I was on pain medication. I was drifting in and out. She came in with her husband and she was holding a folder. I stopped. She asked me to sign something. She said it was just so they could handle my bills while I was incapacitated. I signed it. I barely remember holding the pen. Joanna was very still. "Do you know what the document was?" she asked. She said it was a medical proxy update. But I don't. I shook my head. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just signed. Joanna reached into the fireproof box and pulled out the stack of documents I hadn't looked at yet. She went through them slowly. 3 pages in, she stopped. She set a document on the table and turned it so I could read it. At the top in bold letters, "Durable, power of attorney." The date was 6 days after my heart attack. At the bottom, a signature that was mine, except it looked like it had been written by someone with a tremor. The letters uneven and half-formed. "Under Arizona law," Joanna said quietly, "a person must have the mental capacity to execute a power of attorney. If you are on significant pain medication at the time, that signature is potentially voidable." She paused. "But more importantly, this is not a medical proxy. This gives your daughter legal authority over your finances, your real estate, and your personal property." I stared at the paper. "She told me it was for medical decisions," I said. "It isn't." I sat down in the kitchen chair. Through the window, I could see the brass padlock on the workshop gate catching the last of the afternoon light. Caroline and I had built that workshop together. Well, I had built it, and Caroline had handed me tools and argued with me about the placement of every window until we got it right. She'd used it more than I had in the end. She made furniture in there, a rocking chair she gave to our daughter when she was pregnant, a bookshelf that my son-in-law never acknowledged receiving. When Caroline passed from ovarian cancer 4 years ago, I moved into that workshop every weekend, like it was a church. It was the only place I still felt close to her. "I need to stay here tonight," Joanna said, "and I need to see your bank statements." I didn't argue. She slept on the couch. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, Joanna had made several calls and had a contact at the electric company who agreed to process an emergency reconnection. By mid-afternoon, the power was back. By evening, Joanna had gone through 6 months of bank statements and spread them across the kitchen table in chronological order. She sat across from me and folded her hands. "Your daughter used the power of attorney to take out a home equity line of credit on this property," she said. "It was opened 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks after your heart attack. The credit limit is $180,000. As of today, $112,000 has been drawn." I couldn't speak. "The withdrawals correlate to payments made to an LLC registered to your son-in-law," she continued. "The LLC is a shell company. Its stated purpose is property consulting. It has no clients, no revenue, and no assets other than the money your daughter's been funneling into it." I thought about the pool, the Peloton, the refrigerator that tells you when you're out of milk. "They're living off my house," I said. "Yes." She reached into a folder and slid a document across the table. "There's one more thing I need to ask you about. When did you last refill your heart medication?" I blinked. My daughter picked it up for me back in September. Before the heart attack. She offered to run errands for me, said my doctor had called in a refill, and she'd grab it since she was passing the pharmacy. Joanna's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Where are the pills now?" "We found them in my medicine cabinet." Joanna poured 3 out into her palm and held them under the bathroom light. She didn't say anything. She just took a photo of them on her phone. The next afternoon, she came back with a name, Dr. Rachel Kim, a pharmacologist who worked with the county medical examiner's office on drug-related cases. Joanna had called in a favor. 2 days later, Dr. Kim called. Joanna put her on speaker. "The pills you submitted," Dr. Kim said, "are not atenolol. They're a compounded supplement, primarily magnesium and cellulose. No active cardiac medication, no beta blockers, nothing that would manage hypertension." I heard the words. I heard them clearly, but it took a moment for them to land the way they were meant to. "Someone with unmanaged hypertension," Joanna said carefully. "What's the timeline for something to happen?" "Depends on the individual and their baseline," Dr. Kim said. "But if someone with significant high blood pressure stopped taking their medication abruptly and replaced it with a placebo, weeks maybe. If their pressure was already elevated, possibly sooner. My heart attack had happened 11 weeks after my daughter picked up my prescription." After Joanna ended the call, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and looked at me for a long moment. She didn't say what she was thinking. She didn't need to. I already knew. "She ordered an appraisal before the heart attack," I said slowly. "She set up the HELOC while I was in the hospital. She had a power of attorney ready to sign before I was even stable." I looked at Joanna. "She planned this." Joanna nodded once. "I need to think about what I want to do," I said. "Take the time you need," Joanna said, "but I do need to tell you that what I found constitutes elder financial abuse under Arizona law, and depending on how a prosecutor views the medication, there may be additional charges." "Like what?" She was quiet for a moment. "Reckless endangerment." "Possibly more." I sat with that for a long time that night. I thought about the day Caroline died. My daughter had been there at the end, holding her mother's hand, crying in a way that seemed completely genuine. After the funeral, she'd squeezed my arm and said, "You won't have to do any of this alone, Dad." I had believed her. I had believed her. I had believed her. Maybe that was the oldest mistake a parent can make. The next morning, I called the number Joanna gave me. A prosecutor in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, a man named someone I'd never met, specializing in financial crimes. He agreed to meet with us the following week. But before that meeting happened, I got a voicemail. It was my son-in-law. His voice was careful, neutral, the voice he used when he was measuring his words. "Hey Hank, it's me. Listen, there's some paperwork we need your signature on. Nothing complicated. Can you come by the house this weekend? Aria's been worried about you. We both have." Played it twice. Then I sat there and thought about that padlock on my workshop gate, and the pills in my medicine cabinet, and the $112,000 drawn against my house. Aria was worried about me. I didn't call back. 2 weeks later, I sat across from the prosecutor with Joanna beside me and a folder of documents between us. The prosecutor was methodical, unhurried. He asked the same questions 3 different ways to make sure he understood exactly what happened and when. When he'd finished reading, he leaned back. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "I want to be clear about what pursuing this means. Your daughter will be arrested. Your son-in-law will likely face charges as well. This will become public record. It will be in the news. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Caroline. I thought about the rocking chair in my daughter's nursery that her mother had made with her own hands. I thought about 6 weeks in a hospital bed alone, calling 4 times and getting sent to voicemail. "I'm prepared," I said. What happened next was not what I expected. The morning after I met with the prosecutor, my daughter showed up at my door. She didn't knock. She had a key. I hadn't thought to change the lock, and she walked into my kitchen at 7:45 in the morning like she owned the place. Which I supposed she believed she did. She was wearing workout clothes and carrying 2 coffees from the place she liked. She set one on the counter in front of me like a peace offering. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk." She sat down at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around her cup. She looked tired in a way she didn't usually look. The practiced ease she normally wore had slipped just slightly. I could see the effort it took her to hold it together. "Someone's been talking to you," she said, "about our finances." "You used my house as a credit line," I said, "while I was unconscious in a hospital bed." Dad, you had me sign a power of attorney on morphine." "I was trying to protect you. You couldn't make decisions for yourself. Someone had to." And my medication? She went very still. What about your medication? The pills you picked up from the pharmacy in September, I said. I had them tested. The color drained out of her face so slowly, it was like watching a tide go out. That was a mistake, she said finally. The pharmacy must have. The pharmacy filled the prescription correctly. The pharmacist confirmed it. I kept my voice level. Someone substituted the pills between the pharmacy and my medicine cabinet. She didn't say anything. You were the only one who touched them, I said. Dad, her voice had dropped to almost nothing. We were in a bad position. Ryan Steele fell through and we had debts, real debts, and I thought if I could just bridge the gap by hoping I had a heart attack. I didn't think. She stopped, started again. I didn't know that was going to happen. You switched my blood pressure medication with sugar pills, I said, and then 11 weeks later I had a heart attack. I didn't mean for. Her voice cracked. Dad, I panicked. I thought maybe if you weren't taking the medication for a little while, you'd need more help. You'd be more willing to let me handle things. I didn't think it would actually. She stopped. I looked at my daughter for a long time. I looked at the person I had carried on my shoulders at parades, taught to ride a bike on the driveway, driven to the hospital at 2 in the morning when she was 17 and had a panic attack before her first college interview. Joanna, I said, raising my voice slightly. Joanna stepped in from the hallway, where she had been standing with a phone recording the entire conversation. My daughter's face changed. That's admissible, Joanna said, under Arizona's one-party consent law. My daughter stood up so fast, her chair scraped. She looked at me like I was someone she'd never seen before. I'm your father, I said quietly, and I loved you without conditions for 31 years. But your mother wrote me a letter before she died, and I found it last week in her filing cabinet. She knew who you were. She caught you stealing money from our account when you were 19, and she covered for you, and she carried the guilt of that decision every day until she died. She wrote that the worst thing she ever did was protect you from the consequences of your own choices. I paused. I'm not going to make her mistake. My daughter said nothing. She picked up her coffee and walked out the door, and I listened to her car back out to the driveway. 2 days later, she was arrested at her home in Scottsdale. My son-in-law was arrested 3 hours after that. The charges included elder financial abuse, fraud in connection with a power of attorney, unauthorized use of a credit instrument, and, after the pharmacologist's report was formally submitted, criminal reckless endangerment. The workshop lock was cut by a locksmith Joanna hired the morning after my daughter's arrest. I stood there in the doorway and let the smell of the place hit me, sawdust and linseed oil and something underneath that was just Caroline, the particular warmth of a place she'd loved. It was still there, even after 6 weeks, even after everything. Illegal proceedings took 8 months. My son-in-law cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. My daughter did not cooperate. She hired an attorney who argued that the power of attorney was legitimate, that her father had consented to financial oversight, that the medication substitution had been an accident, a single impulsive decision made under financial duress with no intent to harm. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. They came back with guilty on all counts. My daughter was sentenced to 6 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. My son-in-law received 3 years probation and full financial restitution. The morning after sentencing, I drove out to the cemetery where Caroline is buried. I sat on the bench near the stone and talked to her for about an hour. I told her about the last 9 months. I told her about Joanna, about the workshop, about the letter. I told her I didn't blame her for making the choice she'd made when our daughter was 19. I understood it. She'd been trying to protect the child she loved. I'd probably have done the same thing. But she'd been right that it was a mistake. Some kinds of love have to be willing to hurt the person you love because the alternative is worse. I drove back home and pulled into the driveway and sat there for a minute looking at the house. The yard was cleaned up now. The mailbox was empty. The power was on. The lock on the workshop was gone, replaced by the original latch. Joanna had moved her practice about 15 minutes east of me. She stopped by on Saturday mornings sometimes, and we'd have coffee in the workshop while I worked. She had this way of sitting on the stool near the window, with a case file in her lap that reminded me a little of Caroline, the same focused quiet. One Saturday in March, almost a year after she'd driven me home from that hospital bench, she came by and I was working on a side table, walnut, simple, clean lines, a little unsteady on one leg still. "You know," she said, watching me sand the top, "when I was 16 and working at your store, I used to think you were just a guy who sold pipes and light bulbs." "I did sell a lot of pipes," I said. "I know, but she also talked to me like I was a person, not a kid you were doing a favor for." She paused. "You have no idea how rare that is." I didn't answer right away. I kept sanding. The wood was warm under my hands, and the afternoon light was coming in through the side window the way Caroline had always liked, that long, flat angle that turns sawdust into something almost beautiful. "My wife would have liked you," I said eventually. Joanna smiled. "Tell me about her." So I did. I told her about Caroline's garden and her furniture and the way she used to argue with me about the placement of windows and always turn out to be right. I told her about 31 years in this house and what it had felt like to come back to it that November afternoon after 6 weeks of being alone. I told her about the filing cabinet and the letter and what it had taken to read it. And Joanna listened the way some people know how to listen, without filling the silence, without offering anything except her presence. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. The people who stay aren't always the ones who were supposed to. Sometimes the person who shows up for you is someone you helped once, without thinking much about it, someone who carried a kindness in their pocket for 20 years waiting for the chance to give it back. I picked up that extra $200 out of my cash drawer back in 1998 because a teenager had shown up every day for 12 weeks without being asked, and I thought she deserved to know that someone had noticed. I never expected anything from it. I've forgotten about it, honestly, the way you forget most of the small, decent things you do because you do them and move on. But she hadn't forgotten. And on a Tuesday in November, when I had $67 and no ride home and my own daughter wouldn't answer the phone, Joanna Aldridge pulled into that hospital parking lot because she was visiting a client down the hall, and she heard someone say my name, and she stopped. That's the chain. That's how it works. You don't know when you're doing a small thing that it's going to matter. You just do it because it's right. And then you let go of it. The rest, if you're lucky, has a way of coming back. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the arrest, not the courtroom, not the morning the prosecutor called to tell me it was over. I keep coming back to a Friday afternoon in 1998 when I opened my cash drawer and counted out $200 for a 16-year-old kid who had shown up every single day without being asked. I didn't think much of it at the time. She'd earned it. I put it in her envelope and went back to work. I had no idea I was handing someone the rest of their life. That's the thing about doing right by people. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel significant in the moment. You just do the decent thing because it's in front of you, and then you let go of it and move on. Joanna carried that $200 in her memory for 25 years. She went to college, she went to law school, she built a career, and she never forgot where the chain started. And on a Tuesday in November, when I was sitting alone outside a hospital with $67 and a daughter who wouldn't answer the phone, that chain came back to me. I've thought a lot about what made Joanna different from my daughter. It wasn't luck and it wasn't circumstance. Not entirely. Joanna had been handed a harder start by almost any measure. No money, no stable home, no one to fall back on. But somewhere along the way, she made a choice about what kind of person she was going to be. She stayed honest when honesty was inconvenient. She built her intelligence into something she used to protect people, not to take from them. And when life knocked her down, and it did more than once, she got back up without deciding that the world owed her something in return. My daughter had everything I could give her: a safe house, a good school, a father who showed up. But somewhere along the way she confused being loved with being owed. And when real financial pressure came, she didn't look inward for answers. She looked at what I had and decided it was available. I don't say this to condemn her. I say it because I was part of that equation too. Every time I made an excuse for her, every time I let something go that I shouldn't have, I was teaching her that consequences were optional. Caroline had done the same thing, and it had eaten her alive. She wrote it down so I wouldn't repeat her mistake, and I found that letter just in time. The hardest thing I've ever done wasn't pressing charges against my own daughter. It was accepting that protecting someone you love and enabling them to cause harm are sometimes the same action. Real love, the kind that actually helps a person grow, sometimes has to be willing to cause pain, not out of cruelty, out of honesty. What I want anyone who hears this story to understand is that character isn't something that happens to you. It's built, slowly, out of the choices you make when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. Joanna built hers in the back of a hardware store sweeping sawdust at 6 in the morning. She built it in a law library at midnight. She built it by showing up again and again, even when showing up was hard. That's what lasts. Not the money, not the property, not whatever anyone tries to take from you. What lasts is what you actually are when everything else gets stripped away. I'm 64 years old and I'm still learning this. But I'm learning it in Caroline's workshop, with sawdust on my hands and good coffee on the bench beside me, and someone worth learning it with sitting quietly by the window. That's more than enough.